Star Trek hilariously twists a famous Captain Picard TNG quote. Star Trek Lower Decks puts a hilarious twist on a famous quote spoken by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, in Star Trek The Next Generation. Following the adventures of the USS Cerritos, Lower Decks focuses on the lower-level officers like Lieutenants Brad Boimler, Jack Quaid, Beckett Mariner, Tawny Newsome, and their friends. Picking up about 1 year after the events of Star Trek Nemesis, Lower Decks continues Star Trek's TNG era. Because of this, several characters from previous Trek shows have popped up on Lower Decks, including TNG's Captain Will Riker, Jonathan Frakes. In its fifth and final season, Star Trek Lower Decks remains as funny as ever, incorporating numerous references to past Trek while building on its own established lore. In Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5 Episode 2, Shades of Green, the Cerritos visits the planet Targalis IX that has abolished its capitalist system and abandoned all forms of currency. LT Boimler leads an away team, embracing his role with confidence, inspired by his recent encounter with his alternate universe duplicate. However, after two ensigns on his team get kidnapped, Boimler and Mariner have to mount a rescue mission. Star Trek Lower Decks' Boimler twists Captain Picard's famous TNG quote before LT. At Boimler's two ensigns are kidnapped, LT Beckett Mariner encouraged him to be a fun boss and allow his team to take some time off. Mariner then blames herself for the kidnapping, but Boimler reassures her that neither one of them is to blame. Boimler points out that it is possible to do everything right and still get your away team kidnapped by the corporate elite. This is a hilarious and very specific take on something Captain Picard once told LT. Commander Data Brent Spiner. In Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 21, Peak Performance, Data loses a game of Stratagema, which prompts him to remove himself from bridge duty. Data knows that he made no mistakes and he cannot find anything wrong with his systems, but his confidence is clearly shaken. Captain Picard visits Data in his quarters, telling him that it is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life. Not only does this quote teach Data an important lesson, but it has also become fairly well known beyond the context of the episode. Will Picard appear in Star Trek Lower Decks' final season? In Star Trek Lower Decks' first 4 seasons, the USS Cerritos encountered the USS Titan commanded by Captain Riker, visited Space Station Deep Space Nine, and escorted the USS Voyager back to Earth. Several characters from TNG, DS9, and Voyager have also made appearances, with one glaring exception. Although Captain Picard has been mentioned on the show a couple of times, he has yet to make an appearance. Considering Lower Decks is an extension of the TNG era, it just feels right for Picard to appear before the series comes to a close. In its 4th season, Star Trek Lower Decks became even more interwoven with TNG, as it was revealed that Mariner was at Starfleet Academy with Wesley Crusher, Will Wheaton, and Cito Jaxa, Shannon Phil. Former Starfleet cadet Nicholas Locarno, Robert Duncan McNeil, also returned as the big bad of Lower Decks Season 4, after being dismissed from Starfleet in TNG's The First Duty. Whether or not Captain Picard pops up before the series finale, Star Trek Lower Decks will always feel like a spiritual successor to Star Trek The Next Generation. The legacy of Star Trek is filled with iconic moments, deep philosophical reflections, and of course, a fair share of humor. One of the most memorable aspects of Star Trek The Next Generation, TNG, is the calm, collected, and dignified leadership of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by Sir Patrick Stewart. As the captain of the USS Enterprise D, Picard gave us many powerful lines, but none have become quite as iconic as his emphatic order, "Make it so." It's a simple, elegant phrase that perfectly encapsulates Picard's commanding style, concise, respectful, and unmistakably authoritative. Make it so quickly became synonymous with Picard and his approach to leadership, which emphasized responsibility and collaboration. However, as is the case with many serious cultural artifacts, it wasn't long before fans, parodies, and even Star Trek itself decided to have some fun with the quote. What would happen if "Make it so" was, well, hilariously twisted? Let's dive into a comical reimagining of this famous Captain Picard line, one that flips his usual stoic demeanor on its head. The Enterprise D gets a comedy upgrade. Imagine an episode where a bizarre cosmic anomaly affects the Enterprise in ways no one could predict. For some unknown reason, this anomaly has begun to play with the crew's personalities and actions, leading to the most bizarre and side-splitting situations aboard the starship. It begins with Captain Picard giving his usual command, "Make it so." But this time, something goes wrong. As soon as he utters the words, the ship's computer, affected by the anomaly, decides to reinterpret Picard's comm order in the most literal and absurd way possible. Instead of initiating the ship's usual protocols, the computer interprets "make it so" as a directive to turn the bridge into a replica of a 1980s soap opera set. Suddenly, the officers are standing amidst gaudy furniture. A melodramatic soundtrack begins to play, and every single command comes with the flair of overwrought emotional conflict. Data, the android officer known for his precision and logic, immediately feels the effects. A synthesizer version of soap opera music accompanies his every move, and he speaks in an overly dramatic tone that would make any 80s soap star proud. "Captain," he intones, eyes squinting with faux passion, I cannot compute my emotions." He sweeps his hand across his forehead in a gesture of romantic despair. Captain Picard, on the other hand, remains unamused. His normally calm and measured exterior gives way to visible frustration as the ship's new soap opera-induced reality pushes him toward a breaking point. "What is the meaning of this nonsense?" he demands, striding over to the helm, where Counselor Troi is now gazing dramatically out of a non-existent window, as if she were contemplating her tragic past. The anomaly's effects, however, aren't finished with Picard. When he tries to give his next order this time to return the ship to normal operations, his words are twisted again. Instead of saying "disengage," the only thing that comes out of his mouth is an exaggerated, operatic "disappoint me not," in an accent that sounds suspiciously Shakespearean. By this point, the bridge crew is in disarray. Commander Riker, his usual confident grin replaced with an exaggerated, quivering lower lip, looks at Picard and says, "But Captain, the Enterprise cannot go on like this. Unless you love me." He falls to one knee, holding out his hand, soap opera style. Picard, his patience wearing thin, rubs his temples, but the twisted reality doesn't end. Suddenly, a commercial break interrupts their interactions. Yes, the Enterprise now has commercial breaks. The view screen switches to an advertisement for the Federation's new Starship car wax product, complete with an overly enthusiastic announcer and cheesy, space-themed jingles. When your starship loses that warp speed shine, there's only one thing to trust: stellar wax. The crew exchanges bewildered glances, but they are helpless to stop the madness. The hilarious resolution realizing the crew is being sucked into a vortex of soap opera absurdity, Picard tries desperately to regain control. He reaches for his communicator and attempts to call engineering, but instead, the sound of a dramatic door slam fills the bridge. Counselor Troi, clearly having caught the emotional bug, gasps and says, "Captain, I sense deep emotional turmoil. But more importantly, I sense fabulous hair products in our future." It's at this moment that Picard's usual poise finally cracks. With an exasperated sigh, he throws up his hands and proclaims, "Enough. I demand this lunacy be over at once." "Make it no." His iconic line, twisted beyond recognition by the anomaly, now becomes an unintended punchline. "Make it no," Picard says, half pleading, half exasperated. With that, the ship finally responds. The soap opera reality fades, the melodramatic music dies away, and the bridge returns to its usual high-tech appearance. The commercial break ends. Picard slumps back in his chair,